Alrighty, Tuesday afternoon. This is a Tuesday. We'll finish this section of this lesson on Thursday. That will take us into next week. We'll start a new lesson. I don't frankly remember what it is, but we'll figure it out. But that'll also be halfway through the term, I believe. So anticipate that I'll get you updated on your distribution of your points again after that section. Today, basically, I want to set up an analysis. I'm going to have you construct a model. It's a graphical model, it's not a computer model. And the intent of the model is to understand how things might change ecologically when they're impacted. The impact is going to be the Younger Dryas event, surprise, surprise. And what we're going to do is try to trace the differences in responses to trees and or animals in that respect. So there'll be some time spent on getting that set up. Before I get going, any questions? All right, then I wanted to make one or two comments on the assignments, but we're talking about this climate oscillation, 1,400 years long, got cold, got warm. You'll see different numbers for that, but I'm rounding it to 1,400 years for an argument I'll tell you that time. We know that happened, we know this happened, or we know this happened, basically. These two will be intertwined with your further analysis, and I'll make a comment on the cultural change. One of the challenges in something that's 10 or 11,000 years ago is dating it, putting an absolute age on it. And I've been a little vague about getting into that too deep because it's kind of a mess about that time slice. And several of you actually came up with sort of a good analysis, but it was because there were two different factors operating, and they operated in different ways. So it turns out that the so-called Younger Dryas, all right, so deep time's back here, young time is here. There was a pretty recent paper that actually put some real numbers, some really hard numbers on this, and they're out into sort of the decimal points with plus or minuses of 50 years. Which turns out to be actually technologically an achievement that they can get that close. This is trying to compare an ice core record with some cave records. We haven't talked about them, but they use a different dating technique. So it turns out that we layer count ice cores so we can tell how many layers there are, so we get an annual number. This paper compared it to something called uranium-thorium dating. It's a chemistry of the uranium. But we also commonly use radiocarbon, and radiocarbon is a great tool and is sort of one of the primary ones, but it turns out it doesn't have a linear relationship with age. If I talk about something that actually happened 5,000 years ago, I'm not going to get a radiocarbon age of 5,000 years. I'm going to get something different. I'm not too worried that you know that, other than appreciate that this can be a problem. I don't care, the details don't get that far. But so there's multiple techniques to get to this, to get an absolute number. Then, of course, we report it in different ways because different disciplines started in different perspectives. So, for example, we talk about before present. Well, in radiocarbon years, that's 1950 AD, because that's an established time when everybody could agree upon it. We're now so much further beyond radiocarbon, 1950, that you could actually sort of, you can measure that with radiocarbon, no problem. So, but there's also before Christ, which used to be used an awful lot by the archaeologists. It's not called before Christ now because it's called before the Common Era. So you'll see BE. So, and that's like, we're the year 2000, so 5,000 years before Christ is actually 7,000 years before the present. Again, I'm not concerned that you know that, just to know that this is I was more about your analysis, rather the ages you got, whatever they were, jived or didn't jive. And it's a fascination that they're actually down to these kinds of numbers. They've got the start of it nailed within 30 years or 60 years, and then the end of it is more like 100 years. And that matters for a lot of things, not for this class. Before I go any further with that. Okay, so along that line, then one of the things that's really come into focus in the last years with a lot of this information is, when did the Clovis cultures stop? And it's hard to think, it's easy to see when things start. It's less easy to see when things stop. Basically what this paper did was go back in the last couple of years and really look at a lot of sites across North America. And they said, okay, when's the earliest age that they were there, and when's the latest age that they were there? And then they did, the authors of this are pretty high, what we call heavy hitters in the technique of radiocarbon dating. So this is a very tight analysis. And again, we couldn't have said this 10 years ago. A lot of the debates about which was first, because we didn't know the ages of the darn thing. This is converted to calendar years, and this will tell us that the Younger Dryas, and time's going the other way. Of course, that shows you how screwy timing is, because you never can decide which way to put time. So at any rate, what this basically says is what? Well, how would you interpret this graph? Now let's get gentleman in a blue shirt back there. How would you? So what is this what is these? It's a category. Maybe that would be.
Like the time frame that they found focus artifacts in different locations.
Yeah, these are the different locations, and this is the bar of the age range there.
So.
Okay.
It looks like they kind of moved away from the cold regions as they got colder.
I'm not sure how they ordered this. Well, I know how they ordered it. They ordered it sort of by age, you see, because there's Oklahoma sites in different places, and there's Wyoming sites. So it's not spatially, it's temporally. Right, yeah. But your conclusion is, how long were there evidence of Clovis people or folks?
400.
Well, they might have they were here, and then they were here, but really they stop right about there. There's no real evidence of them any younger than that. And where is that in the Younger Dryas? Well, it's not at the beginning and it's not at the end, right? And it's about 400 years. So this is a big improvement if we were concerned about these details. I'm taking it as broad brush. They point out that the megafauna extinction happens about this time. If we did the same analysis of the megafauna, we also see some slop to it. But, all right, so that's fine. Does that matter to us? That they have a detail, they have 400 years for the Clovis people, they stopped at a certain time. In the middle of the Younger Dryas, not at the beginning or the end, which we would always like to see, right? For cause and effect. I'm making it more of a, I'm putting it out as to show you how the science keeps evolving. I'm considering all these things basically the same, because you can't get any more precise than this. You'd have to change your course every once in a while. So the answer is the Clovis went belly up, so to speak, sometime in the middle of the Younger Dryas. Right there. This number would go back a little bit further than that too. All right, that's a dating problem. It gets us the Clovis people. Now we want to mess around with the plants and animals. So we're going to talk about eco-regions and the reorganization of them, or ecosystems, and they're not quite the same. The outline for what's going on is the definition of ecosystems and ecoregions, thinking about how they respond in a very limited way. It's much more complex than we would get into. And then the thing we want to know is, how fast could those responses happen? Well, we just saw one culture come and go in a few hundred years. All right, we're going to put that together with a model, conceptual model of an ecosystem during an interval that's about 1,400 years long. All right, definitions. Let's get these out of the way. An ecological region are areas where the ecosystems, systems is a subcategory of the regions. Land type, quality, quantity of environmental resources are similar. Okay, so Ohio sets in an eco region that probably is the same ecoregion as Indiana. We don't sit in the same ecoregion as Alaska. So that means the regions are sort of the hierarchical. For your exercise, we're going to deal with regions, not the ecosystems, which there may be many. Within the Ohio area, there's the ecosystems of the river system, there's lake systems, there's land systems, there's some of the farming agricultural lands. Ecosystem is different than in the southeast part of the state where there's not as much farming. So the systems then are the smaller groups. We can talk about the ecosystem of Cincinnati almost. And that would be the type quantity of environmental resources is the same. Most of it gets trucked in, but that's a different issue. Ecosystem is a geographical area where the plants, animals, and organisms, as well as the weather and landscape, form a bubble of life. What this is implying is that there's interdependency. No surprise, plants and animals, they are interdependent as it gets, but obviously weather, the landscape that they're working on, and make this grouping. And so you'll see things about ecosystems decaying, or you tear it apart. So you could talk about the ecosystem of a lake, you could talk about some sort of pollution introduced to that lake, and that would pretty much change the ecosystem in that lake. Might not extinct, there would probably still be an ecosystem there, but the perturbation would change it. So these are smaller things, but it's a geographical area where they work together. All right, so we got that out of that. We want to talk about regions to keep it a little simpler. Okay? And this ecological region is an area. Can you think of an ecosystem besides ones I might have mentioned already? How so? A beach. There's along the coastal zone, in the coastal zone, there are both the interfaces of things living on the land, things living in the water, things living on land but using the air to get around. There's salt water, there's fresh water. It's a fairly complex ecosystem. It's narrow, depending on how you want to define it. Can you think of an ecoregion? Changing the term now. A bigger, broader area.
The Amazon rainforest.
Whoops. The Amazon rainforest would be an ecoregion. Covers a good part of the continent.
Yeah, it's all pretty similar.
It's all, they would debate about that, but we can lump them together if we want a bigger area. And that would contrast to where would be another ecoregion, say in South America, do you know? The rainforest is sort of in the heart of South America, takes it out of there. Go ahead.
I was going to say in Africa, the Sahara Desert.
In Africa, there's an arid desert, but there's also a rainforest right next to it. We've seen that a couple times, right? So those would be different ecoregions. That white desert versus the green down at the bottom. And then if you actually go further south, we haven't talked about it, there's another arid area in Africa. Okay, so those are bigger scale things. We're okay with these working definitions. All right. One of the exercises was to find this or some map similar to it. Virtually everybody found either this map or a derivative of it. And what this is telling us is the distribution by the pretty colors of what are commonly accepted as the ecoregions in North America. And that includes Canada, Mexico, and the United States. So study that map for a second. And lady in the green shirt, what do you find interesting about the patterns of the ecoregions, if anything?
I would say the bottom part of Florida, how all of Florida is the green and the little part at the bottom is pink, so it's tropical.
All right, so the bottom part, the southern part, what about it again, please?
It's had like more tropical climates than the rest of
These areas.
our
Is that what you're saying? There's a lot of different regions in here. So the density of regions, you go from there to there to there to there, you go from a different region by itself. Okay? In contrast, one we're in, kind of boring, right? Okay? Would you pick up on something that you caught your eye in the patterns of these things?
I noticed like they're more tundra and forest, or not forest, or tundra's like up north in New Canada and
Mm-hmm.
the colder areas.
And so the area that the forest that we're in sort of ends here, and then trees sort of end here. This is subdivisions of what we might call tundra. There's no trees up there, but there's some different subdivisions in it, and it covers a big area. It takes a long time to drive across that. You can't drive across it this way anyway. There's no roads. But there is another area, and so there. I don't know, 15 ecoregions. And as this lady pointed out, there's one tip of South America, of Florida gets one. Then there's a few. What about this pattern? It's a striking north-south pattern of an ecoregion. Anybody hazard a guess why that might be? Gentleman in the black. Caleb?
Probably because of the direction, the weather coming off of the equator from like the southern tip.
Okay, the weather patterns, in what senses?
You have a lot of really different like environments, like Texas is in there, Mexico, which is rather like dry for the most part. And then you have more tropical regions around in Mexico, close to the ocean.
Down in here, there's some complexity, right? And that could be precipitation. I guess another way I would look at it is we think about this alignment, and all the ecosystems have an east-west border to them. So the simplest interpretation, that has something to do with proximity to the equator or temperature. As you get farther north, you go from a series of different forest types to no forest types. But there's a contrast here. We go in this one, and these go north-south. So we can't attribute to that simply to temperature. Now, do you think it's precipitation?
Maybe more towards the like northern regions, not as much as the southern.
I'm not sure where I know where you're asking to. This is one region. It goes north-south a long way, right?
So like just I guess like the rain probably receive more precipitation than something like the yellow and like the brown areas.
I agree there's more precipitation here than here, and it's coming from here. But why does it stretch so far that way? And there's another one right here, by the way. Why does it stretch so far that way? Gentleman in the red shirt way back up here.
Maybe because there's like different elevations.
Different elevations. You ever traveled to Colorado?
No.
So people of Colorado, where's Colorado on this map? Right here. What happens when you come out of across Missouri, Nebraska, Kansas, all that, and you run into the Rocky Mountains. So topography is a main player for this division. And the precipitation is true across this, but these are mountains also. Now there's different heights of the mountains and all of that business. And likewise, that pattern follows. This is a contrast of how far away from the ocean you are. This gets pounded with rain, this doesn't get anything. This is a grassland, this is dry. It goes way from Mexico up into Canada. So that's a flat line. So the ecoregions then are big divisions. We want to see how we think they might change if climate changes. And it's not as simple as saying, oh, the climate gets warmer, so the northern limit of this moves north. Would we worry about ecosystems moving east-west if we move climate, if we change climate? We were making an argument that this is topography control. What does it care about climate?
Well,
Or would it?
the topography wouldn't necessarily change. Well, it wouldn't change.
Well, no, it's not going to change on that time
Yeah,
scale,
but
right?
it would change what's coming in off the ocean if the climate was changed, especially if the coast was changed. It
Well,
could affect where the rain is going to get dropped off.
The coast is that buffer is the rain shadow. These don't get much rain anywhere. But you could visualize also that these patterns could change a little bit in here. So some of the details would change, but I don't think it's going to change the north-south alignment. All right, anything else about what an ecoregion is or an ecosystem, how they play together? We're going to simplify it quite a bit from here on in. And I want to bring up a point about things like this green spot in the middle of this, or a green spot, or an axis of a green spot here. And to do that, I'm going to go down and zoom down and scale and show a picture of a low area versus a high area. And the thing that comes here, what catches your eye about the low area versus the high area on this particular pretty picture?
The low area is like got a lot of grass and trees, and then the high area, I think it has like snow on it.
Grass, trees, farms. Where do the trees? This is a valley, so this is a lot closer to us than over here. Where do the trees stop? Tell me when the trees are going to stop.
A little bit higher, right on there.
Yeah, that's the tree line. That's the line of trees. So the trees, whatever kind of trees they are, don't go any higher than this. Why? Probably more temperature. Now, there's another subtle zone in here. There's the tree limit. There's the green limit. And then there's a white limit. Now, the white might be ephemeral, but this is a transition from trees to shrubs to really small stuff. You don't see the plant. Up in here, you don't see plants. There aren't very many, depending on how high this mountain is. Okay, so there's an elevational change, and we could conceptually turn that on its end and go north to south in the eastern North America, not only. It's easy to explain the temperature. Why would precipitation matter? One of the first things she pointed out was there's snow up there. Well, that's partly, this is too low, there's a temperature rise, there's temperature cooling as you go up. But does that mean this gets less precipitation than this necessarily? Or do we know? Lady over there, do you know anything about elevation changes and precipitation changes? Obviously, it's not all the same precipitation, or I wouldn't be asking it that way, right? Do you think of the tops of mountains as being, well, you can think of them being snowy, but I mean, I'm wondering if that snow is there because it gets dumped a lot of precipitation there, or if it's cold enough to keep what gets dumped there in snow form, right? It's a combination of both. So there's something called the orographic effect that dictates that when wind is carrying moisture, we've talked about the ability of the air to carry moisture, and it's temperature controlled, right? And the colder it is, the less moisture it can carry. So when here's a mountain range, and when the wind coming in here hits that mountain range, it's forced to go up over it. So if I've got, say, 100 atoms per whatever of water molecules there, what's going to happen as the temperature goes down, as the air goes up? Moisture, the ability of the air to hold moisture is temperature dependent, right? Colder, less moisture, warmer, more moisture. I've got a certain number here. What am I going to do with the air? Cool it or warm it as it goes up over the mountain?
It's gonna cool.
So what's going to happen to the?
It'll
it'll precipitate out. So there's an enormous precipitation gradient right here on one side of the mountain where it loses, I don't know what percentage it loses, but hypothetically something like that. So that's why those wet areas on the Pacific coasts are pretty wet. Now there's another side to this that you don't normally talk about, but when the air goes back down over here, it gets warm again. So all of a sudden it can absorb more moisture. So what it does is basically suck the moisture that's in the ground out into the air. There's a dry side of every mountain range. There's a wet and a dry side to them. And the contrast can be quite striking. And this is easier seen on simple mountain ranges like New Zealand than it is on larger mountain ranges like the Canadian Rockies. But that's basic physics happening again. So we've got horizontal and vertical distribution of things. Review, blah, blah, blah. You're getting bored of that slide. Bottom line here is that ecological reason gives you some perception that they're static. But I think since we're dealing with a geology course and all we've done so far is talk about change, you'd be suspect that those ecosystems probably change, ecoregions change over time. And that's what we want to model. Most of the rest of, now, for example, plants. How do plants propagate? Well, they have seed or pollen. And it's basically wind blown. And so the wind comes, in this case, from this side, and here's a group of trees, and the bigger trees propagate moving their kind of tree in that direction. And so the representation here is these are younger trees than these, same species. So they just get bigger. There's another model of propagation that says if I have things that can be blown a long ways. Some pollen grains are very small, so they can go a long ways. So this could be blown all the way over here where you set up a satellite forest, so to speak, that does its own thing. So if you want to migrate the forest and you want to do it fast, do you want the seeds that behave like this or this? Who needs, gentleman way in the back with the Mac. Do you want, if you want to propagate the forest fast, do you want a seed type that does this or this? Yeah, because it'll hop skip. And it doesn't rely on just getting a little bit and a little bit. This is giving you the impression that each one passes on to this. This one says, I'm going to leapfrog that, basically. Okay, there are other dispersion models. I just want to bring, the point of this is not to get too deep into the dispersion models, but the notion that under different conditions, it takes a while for a species to migrate. If conditions say static, it'll repopulate itself where it's at. Only if you change its conditions, its habitat or the environment, why would they migrate? Okay, now, philosophical question. Do you worry about which, if you talk about the migration? The lady here. Do you worry about the individuals or do you worry about the species? What's actually migrating in either of these cases? The species itself. Individuals don't go anywhere. They're rooted. How can they go anywhere? So you can visualize an environmental change that sent this species over here, but this species might not survive that environmental change. So if it just moves over here, then we've shifted our ecosystem. Subsequently, we could shift our ecoregion. Okay, this is a fairly simple example. It's just dependent on one species of tree. Any other questions on that? Okay, how fast can this occur? There's a really nice paper by NPR put out a couple years ago, well, it's almost 10 years ago now, but some studies were looking at how fast trees were going up in elevation along the mountainside. Again, it's a proxy of how fast the temperature was going up. And converting the 100-foot elevation to meters, you get something like 30 meters a year that the trees can migrate its species up. That's pretty fast. Takes me almost a year to hike up 100 feet, but so that means that it's reestablished. So if we go back to the diagram of this, these trees could be 100 feet higher next year, or the trees won't be, the saplings of the next generation will be 100 meters. And 100 feet you'd barely be able to see at this distance because we're a long ways away from it. But nevertheless, it's pretty impressive. Okay, so trees are going up in elevation. There's going to be some fun and games for this exercise with unit conversion, so I put it in here. I did that conversion to get away from the English system. And this is probably on the fast end. This study probably emphasized something was going on as fast as it could. Link outlines in the words the key concept in this exercise. Oh, this link outlines the key concept. What's going to happen not just to this species, but to the interrelationship of species. Because there's, whatever this tree is, there's probably some insects or small mammals that feed on it. If this was a nut tree, then there would be some small squirrels or something. Well, if that tree is going 100 meters up a year, that also implies it's going out 100 meters, 130 meters a year, the bottom end of the distribution. If these are valuable nuts, you've got to be moving every year. Okay, let's get on to one more point, and I think we're there. Ecologists worry about this a lot. They worry about how fast a species can migrate. Now, this is more generically species. This isn't just trees. And along this axis are the trees, and then on this axis is the rate in kilometers per decade. So you can convert that and you get a fast number. And so we should convert that because here's trees. Now there's a sort of an average, there's the fastest and the slowest. So whatever this thing is can go from really slow, like 10 kilometers per decade to over 100 kilometers per decade. All right, so there's a range of variability. But the 30 meters per year would translate to what in kilometers per decade? Is it 30 or is it 3? $30 meters a year in 1 decade would be 3 meters a year. So that the 3 meter thing that we just saw is down in here, not up here. And that makes sense because it doesn't say that trees are going that far. Okay. A whole bunch of critters and things here. There's a little silhouette. Which one do you find the most interesting?
Probably the snail.
Probably the snails. Why is that the most interesting?
I don't know, I just think it wouldn't be as stretched out as like a butterfly or a split-hoofed mammal or any of that stuff. Like I feel like it would be smaller.
In a speed, you're talking about speed. So the snail can migrate as fast as a cheetah. I think it's a cheetah or carnivore. These are groups of animals, but a big cat. Okay. You know why?
What was the question?
Do you know why they can be that fast? You don't think of snails trucking along that fast. They don't, right? But it's the ability for them to migrate. The species to migrate. It's not the ability of the species of the individual to get that far. All right, so there's got to be some hidden mechanism that's not obvious to them for how they're propagating. And an individual snail might be able to move in a decade 100 kilometers anyway. So that means they can carry the whole thing. I don't know what the average slow as a snail, I don't know what that really means. But the fact that it can propagate fast is curious, obviously. What's another one that you'd find interesting?
Probably the monkey, because this is, doesn't seem like it migrates that much, just kind of in the short little area.
All right, say again, please.
The monkey or the primates.
The primates, the primates or the monkeys or the baboons or whatever, they can't migrate. They're sort of in the squirrel category for migration rates. So why is the ecology of the snails, sort of the monkeys and things, they couldn't move fast, but they're down in the plant category. So I mean, you've got like there's trees, herbs, there's these two mammals of various types, then there's fast mammals and birds and mollusks. So it's not a simple, question is it's not simple. Not the question, that's the interesting problem. And it's not related to the size or how fast they are individually. It's related to how fast they can go and set up shop someplace. So it tells us, I think, that this thing can set up shop fast. Butterfly carrying the shop with them, so yeah, that's no problem, as is a snail. Your big hooved animals can move fast, but their lower end's up pretty fast. Let's think about that a minute. Moose, caribou, deer, gazelles, things like that. What do most of those eat? What do moose feast on? Anybody know? Go ahead. Excuse me? Leaves and grass. They browse on trees also, plants. And how fast can these things migrate relative to the potential of that moose? Not very good. So could we visualize a situation where an environmental impact came and smacked the thing and the moose says, I'm going to get out of town? What about its food supply? If it's one of these things, the moose can get out of town, got nothing to eat. So, right? So the rate doesn't entirely depend on the ability of how fast this moves, it's what its food source is. If the food can't move that fast, it can't move. In this case, it says that these aren't rate limited by that, but as an example, I think that's the concept that we want to model. We want to see as environmental change happened, what happens to the dispersion of both the plants and the animals in the broad categories. Okay? We ready to get in the nuts and bolts? Do we need more information on this? Well, look, there's an assignment. Again, questions, open question time. Sir?
So is it the fact that the reason the carnivorous mammals are migrating is because of the caribou and deer?
Well, the carnivores can feed on these things. So yeah, they might as well, that ecological balance based on this relative speed of the thing says that carnivores can keep up with any escape that the moose has underway, the carnivore can keep up with them, so he can have lunch. Now, what happens if the carnivore goes out for lunch one day, but the moose isn't there because he didn't have any trees? Then the carnivore is going to be hungry. So there can be a domino effect through this system. And I'm pretty sure that there are some interdependencies in here that are kind of breezed over for the sake of argument. One of the things you might have to look up a little bit is how fast a more specific species can migrate, okay, for this exercise. I'm going to give you the questions. I'm going to walk through, there's like a 7-page addendum or whatever that's information that gets this problem set up. So here's the general problem. I can't even read the print at this scale. But there's like 8 slides. I want to walk through the 8 slides and tell you what each one is, and we'll talk about it. This is kind of the key thing. You've got to get everything into meters per year, or the thing isn't going to make any sense. Okay, And you've got 4 questions, 5, 5, and 10, 10 points. And basically, we can do questions 1, 2, and 3 on a slide or a handout, or I've got a sketch map. And then the last one is a standard, tell me what you think about it. So now I'd like to go through these 3 slides, these 8 slides, and show you what they are. There's a separate file on Canvas that has just the ones that you need to work on. Does that make sense? Is everybody enthused about that? Less so than making sense. Okay, well, gotta take battles where they go. First slide, the model description. What we're trying to do is a model is a conceptual idea. We're trying to do a little bit of math, it's multiplication only, to see how the species could interact with each other. We're going to model how they interacted during an interval. It took 1,000 years for this interaction to play out, or 1,400 years, whatever it is. We're going to assume that the plant distribution at the start of this time is the present ecoregions. That's the map we already had. And so the ecoregions are called the tundra, the northern forests, and the eastern temperate forests. And we're just going to examine how those ecoregions might have evolved. We're going to assume that there's an area for 3,000 kilometers long, and we're going to assume that each of the zones today is presently 1,000 kilometers long. We want to find out, at the end of it, is zone 2 still 1,000 kilometers, or has it been translocated somewhere? We got 1,400 years to do this. Now, I thought of another thing that I wanted to say about this. I think it's on another slide, but I'm going to tell you this is not a global warming exercise. The way I've set it up, it's a global cooling exercise. Does it make any difference? Maybe not. Here are your ecozones. And they're represented by 1,000 kilometers of the green, 1,000 kilometers of the aqua, and 1,000 kilometers of the purple. So these little sketch things is what's going to change. The shape of these boxes right now are all the same, or the size of the boxes is all the same. What I want to see is how you figure that they will accordion or shift or whatever. You're not going to shift the green up to here, but you could make this smaller or bigger. You can make this smaller or bigger. So you can change the relative ratio of these. That's what you're going to do with your math. And the specific regions that you're dealing with, the purple is called the tundra. The aqua or the marine or whatever it's called the northern forests. And the green is the eastern temperate forest, which is where we live today. So here are the 3 ecoregions that we want to talk about. We want to shift them. Questions so far? The next couple slides are some worksheets that are designed to give you guidance about the information you have to gather to make this calculation. The first one is for the present day. Take these 3 things and fill in the names of the ecoregions, and then find out what the typical plants are there and some of the typical animals. And then anything else you might want to add in, how fast they can migrate. You don't need to do this for all species. I just want you to be aware that there's multiple species in here. Okay? So it's a worksheet to get you the base information. So you got a little information how fast they go. So that's called slide 4, but that's actually question 1. This will be slide 5, but it's actually question 2. Okay, and here we go. Estimate the migration rates. How fast can that set of plants migrate? You're going to have to use the graph that we had or look it up. How fast can the animals migrate? And we're still talking about these 3 zones. And you're going to have to make some assumptions and stick them in here just as information of text. Okay? The third diagram is where I can look at it instantly and tell if you got the concept or not, of course. This is all paperwork administrative. Is adjusting these boundaries on this transect and plotting them in here. And so you've got to draw 2 lines here, and you can label the colors if you want, or the names. But I'm looking to see where they change to. That's the exercise. Okay? And that's going to come from where? It's going to come from these estimates, which is going to come from these plant types, which is going to come from the operational definition of these. Everybody get that architecture? You get that art? Does that make sense back in the corner? Maxine, makes sense? Perfect. Okay, so fill in blanks and draw a pretty picture. Those 3 slides I've given to you in either a PowerPoint or both a PowerPoint and a PDF format, so you can use them graphically and then just spit them back into the little boxes to upload them. The thinking question on slide 7 is explain it. Okay. What do you think about it? Why is it that pattern? And there should be some. I didn't design this exercise for it to look exactly the same. So, explain the differences. All right, I think there's one more slide and 8. Okay, just that. So again, it's cooling, and I forget where that cooling is in there. The range of the purple. What we want is the range of the purple after 1400 during a cold period. Which way will the things migrate if it gets cold? Include the distances. This got cut and paste to the next slide. Should have been eliminated off this one. Okay, so with that conceptual idea, I'm telling you this doesn't make any sense. Here's a distribution that one could come up with. If one comes up with this, and I've already told you it doesn't make any sense, you better try something else. Why doesn't that make any sense? Lady in the green sweatshirt? Well, it's hard to tell a lot about these things, but these cold areas shouldn't shrink, right? So they shouldn't move north in a colder time. They should move south. Or they move south. And one of the interesting things, are they going to move south together or not? And like this one didn't move. So anyway, there are distributions which won't make any sense. And somebody will put one up, and I'll explain why it doesn't make any sense. But this is colder situations. If it got colder, this shouldn't get smaller. Should get bigger. Now the question is, how much bigger? This much? Do they change this way? Do they change that way? Is it this much? All of those are rich information that you can gather and understand a little bit about the ecology of all these critters with just simple math. All right. Oops. I think that was it anyway. Any questions before we adjourn? Okay. Again, we're well before the class period's over, but I will, if you want to start on this at this point, I'm happy to urge you along. Otherwise, we'll see you on Thursday, and we'll talk about it.